Hi, everyone. My name is Sherry Jacobs, and I'm going to share with you a strategy called Think Aloud. Think Aloud basically enables a student to understand what happens in the mind of a fluent reader as they read. Are they making predictions as to what might happen next? Are they thinking, let's clarify, I made that prediction. Was I accurate? They might be thinking, I wonder what that means. Or, did this character feel differently than they did before? So there are a lot of different things that go on in the mind of a fluent reader. And so if we model a Think Aloud, we're showing other students or readers what goes on in our minds. I'm going to use this story called Pink and Say today to do this Think Aloud for you. It's a book by Patricia Polacco, and it's the genre called historical fiction, because it actually comes from a true story that's been handed down through the generations in her family, and it has history in it. But as you well know, when stories are handed down, they're not all necessarily accurate in every sense of the word. So I'm looking at this text, and I would be reading Pink and Say. Wow, that's kind of a strange title. I wonder what they mean by Pink and Say. What does Patricia Polacco say? And then I'm looking at these two gentlemen on the front cover of the book. They look relatively young. There's two gentlemen. Yep, I'm getting it in there wrong for you. Two gentlemen, and they're looking at a book themselves as they are sitting there. So I'm wondering, they look just maybe a little bit unkempt. They look, they don't look happy either. So basically, I would start this by sharing what celebrates shared humanities of our whole world. So I'll go out and I'm just going to read a few things to you. You'll see that on the inside cover, there's a picture of somebody cooking out an open fire. And it's dedicated to the memory of Pinchas Ali. So right away, I'm wondering, Pinchas, Pink and Say. I wonder if that has anything to do with the title. It starts out with this message in the front of the book. When Sheldon Russell Curtis told this story to his daughter Rosa, she kept every word in her heart and was to retell it many times over the time of her lifetime. Sheldon had been injured in the fierce battle and was left for dead in the middle of a muddy, blood-soaked pasture somewhere in Georgia. He was a mere lad of 15. He lay there for 2 days, by his reckoning, only to slip into unconsciousness and fever. He was rescued from the field by another lad who had also been separated by his company. I will tell it in his own words, as nearly as I can. I watched the sun edge towards the center of the sky above me. I was hurt real bad. For almost a year I'd been in this man's war, the war between the states. Being just a lad, I was wishing I was home. My leg burned and I was angry from the lead ball that was lodged in it just above the knee. I felt sleepy and everything would go black. Then I'd wake up again. I wanted to go back to our farm in Ohio, and sometimes when I'd fall into one of them strange sleeps, I'd be there with my ma, tasting bacon powder biscuits fresh out of her wood stove. So a couple things come to my mind as I'm reading this. He talks about the lead ball that made his knee angry or his leg angry, and I'm wondering, what's that from? What caused that? What is a lead ball? And then he talks about he felt sleepy and everything would go back black. So I'm wondering, could that mean that he's passing out? That he's losing consciousness? So those are the things that come to my mind as I'm thinking through that first page of the text. Now, this next story, you get a lot from the photo in the story. You can see that there is somebody that has come to his rescue. Sorry for the movements of the book. It's kind of difficult to keep it the right place, to face the camera and everything all at the same time. So this has a lot of rich vocabulary on this page. Being here, boy, means you gotta be dead, the voice said as he gave me a drink from his kit. Where you hit? 'Cause if it's a belly hit, I gotta leave you here, he said. I had never seen a man like him so close. His skin was the color of polished mahogany. He was flying Union colors like me. His age, maybe? My age? His voice was soothing, and his help was good. Hitting the leg, I told him, not bad if you don't go green. Can you put weight on it, he asked, as he pulled me up to my feet. We gotta keep moving. If we stay in one spot, marauders will find us. They're riding drag and looking for the wounded. So I'm thinking the boy was the color of polished mahogany. If I didn't already have the book to show me, I would assume that it was a black man that was helping him. Then he says, if it don't go green. Now I'm going to be thinking, could he mean gangrene? For somebody that's reading that, not of maybe our generation or is quite as old, they're probably going to need a little support to know what that means. And then he talks about marauders, which would be something easily enough shared that he was, that they're robbing things and scavenging. And then I'm going to go ahead and go on, and he talks about how he takes him, this other Union soldier takes him to his home. And so he lives there with his mom, and she's excited to see him come back. And so they nurse him. He tells them that his name is Sheldon, and she's and her name is Momobe. And the gentleman that had found him says that we can't stay there long because they're putting her in danger. And he talks about how they need to go back to the war, and as quick as they are able. And so Momobe continues to help him to get better. She feeds him raw milk, which might be another explanation that needs to be had for that. And he talks about how it's different from when he was in Ohio. And then he talks about the gentleman who lives there talks about how that his parents, his mother and Kalo, his father, jumped the broom on the very spot he was at. And Pink wasn't sure what that meant. Obviously, you know now Pink is the name, his name is what the book is from. So I've confirmed one of my first assumptions, or my first anticipatory set from the beginning of the book. And he says, he talks about it being the master's house, Master Ali. And then he asked him why he doesn't have a last name. And he says, boy, when you owned, you ain't got no name of your own. Even Kalo had to take that name, and that's his father. And when they're talking about jumping the broom, in case you don't know that was how they got married, because they could not legally marry each other. They were considered property, and they were unable to get married because they were property. So you can see there are a lot of different issues touched upon in this book. The war between the North and the South. What the difference was between what they call a colored army and the regular army. One day, Pink and Ali were talking, one day Pink and Sheldon were talking, and he asked him what was his outfit, and he said he was the Ohio 24th, and he carried the staff. He wasn't supposed to carry a gun, but they let him because so many people had died. They typically only armed the soldiers in the colored army with hammers and sledges. They wouldn't trust him to fight the war, even though they were putting their lives at risk as well. So he continued to get better. And they had a library full of books there, and the books that belonged to Master Ali, and Black people weren't allowed to be taught to read, but his master had taught him because he wanted him to be able to read to him. And so he taught um, Pink he taught Pink how to read. Um, and then one day they decided it was time, they were going to pack up and they were going to be leaving. And then and that night, Ali took out his pocket, that night, Sheldon took out a pair of glasses from his pocket, and he shared reading with him. And he said, he shared the Bible, the Psalms of David, and he started to read, and he worked with him some more on reading at that point. And he said he was ashamed. Sheldon was ashamed because he couldn't read, and Pink told him he would teach him to read well one day. And he said, I have done something important. That's what Sheldon said. And he said, of course you have. What have you done? And he said, I touched Mr. Lincoln's hand. It was near Washington. We were quartered there just before the Bull Run. The president himself was shaking everyone's hand, and I just put my hand right out. And he took it? Pink asked. Yep, he took it, I answered. Now there's a sign, isn't it? He said, smiling broadly. Touch my hand, Pink. Now you can say you've touched the hand that shook the hand of Abraham Lincoln. Next thing, best thing to touching him, Momo Bay said in wonder. And then it goes on where the marauders show up at their house, and they wind up killing Momo Bay. And then I keep thinking what's going to happen next as I'm in the story. They killed her. What's going to happen to Sheldon? What's going to happen? Is he going to get killed? Is Pink going to get killed? And so they decide they're going to go back and they're going to go find their one of their regiments and get back into the war after she loses her life. I've got to think something bad might be happening when they're back on the road again. And then they did get stopped, and Pink handed the glasses, which they called spectacles, to Sheldon, and he said, if we get caught, he'll be in trouble for sure with that. So they got them, and they became prisoners of the Confederate Army. So now, of course, we're thinking, what might happen with this? Where are we going with this? Because I know some bad things happened. And so they took them to a Confederate camp, and it was Andersonville. Now, Andersonville, I'm thinking, I don't know much about that camp. I wonder what kind of a camp that was. And then they learned it was one of the worst of the Confederate camps. So pretty quickly, I found out the answer to my question that I thought about in my head. And so when they got there, they pulled them apart, the two men apart, and they both begged no. And Pink had a fever at that point, and he stumbled and fell, and they drug him along. And then he reached for Sheldon, and he said, let me touch the hand that touched the hand of Mr. Lincoln. Say just one more time. And he did. And then they took him away, and it says they crossed his back with knotted hemp. I might have to kind of think about what that means in my mind, and maybe look that up to see what that means. And then the story ends. Sheldon Russell Curtis was released from Andersonville prison some months ago, weighing no more than 78 pounds. Andersonville was built to hold only 10,000 prisoners, but by the end of the war, it held 33,000 soldiers. There was no fresh water, no shelter, and no food, and 13,000 men and boys died of starvation and dysentery. Sheldon Curtis returned to his home and recovered. He settled in Berlin Township in Saranac, Michigan. He married Abigail N. Barnard and fathered 7 children. He became a grandfather and a great-grandfather during his long lifetime.